Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Nick Wisner, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Yeah, happy to be here.
And you're going to be fun tonight, I can tell already.
I am going to be pretty fun.
Yeah.
That's my vibe.
Dry humor, sarcasm?
A little bit of both. Yeah.
Okay.
A little column A, a little column B.
Just some straight up funny, and then some, was he trying to be funny or was he serious?
Right. You're going to have to re-listen to this guy.
Yeah, re-listen and not have the video. Right,
yeah. You don't have the video to give you a hand, so you're just going on my voice.
Yeah, exactly.
And best of luck.
It's going to be fun. I'm pretty good at picking up on dry humor, so hopefully I stay with you the entire time and we don't take any awkward turns. But if we do, it happens.
If we do, we do.
Yeah.
You know, what are you going to do?
It'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah, all right. So I guess we should tell our listening audience how you and I know each other. We work together.
We do.
You are a technical person. I
deal with tech.
And I am a non-technical person.
Correct.
So we'll explore the tech stuff a little bit.
Sure.
But I have to say the reason I wanted to have you on this podcast, and congratulations, you're one of the first 240 people to be on this podcast. But
that was pretty good.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
I saw you at a happy hour, sort of a fun thing after work, and
right.
I wasn't in the conversation with you, but I was checking out conversations around me, and you were one of them. And I'm like, oh, he's pretty funny. He's pretty smart guy. He's pretty observant. Like, I probably should get to know this guy a little bit.
I appreciate that.
Then we have this, what I'll call a management on-site thing that we did, where we got everybody together to talk about all kinds of fun things. And we had a breakout session where these things happen. You have breakout sessions when you pull all these people together.
Right.
And I had a small group, and I said, hey, I'm going to need somebody to facilitate. And you're like, yep, I'll do that. And there were, 6 or 7 folks in the room maybe?
Yeah.
And I said, okay, great. I'm going to need somebody to take notes. And you're like, yep, I got that too. And then I'm looking at the rest of the room like, hey, guys, I'm going to need somebody to present not named Nick. Because Nick shouldn't do all 3 of these.
Right.
And by nature, most of us are introverted at our company.
I would say so, yeah.
So I wasn't super shocked that people weren't raising their hand to present.
Sure.
And then you waited about a second. You're like, yeah, I'll do that too. And I'm like, why are you doing all 3? And you're like, I'm just going to lean in. I'm like, oh my God, he's leaning. And you did all 3. Then you presented. You were by far the funniest. I thought what you presented was actually really good.
I still think we should do the thing that we presented.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Priorities and other people's opinions, I think, are maybe
sure.
getting in our way.
It's not going to make us a ton of money, but
it's a worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. It was the thing that I wanted to solve, and I think you came up with a really good solution.
Which I appreciate, yeah. And I thought it was good too. The lean in thing is that's a recent thing. You wouldn't expect the tech guy to go into a room full of people that he works with, but he doesn't really know.
Right.
And then be the guy that also leans in.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I kind of straddle that line of introverted, extroverted.
Ambivert, I think, is the term for that.
That's the... Oh.
I'm also an ambivert.
Oh, well, TIL.
You got a little of both in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like there are times where you have to lean in.
Yeah.
And there are times where maybe pull back a little bit.
And if in doubt, I think you probably lean in these days, I'm guessing.
I do. I haven't always been that way, but I've learned over the years that I don't know if it's a control thing or what, but it's kind of like if you want to get something done and no one else is going to step in, well, you have 2 options. Either you wait for someone else to step in or you just do it.
Yeah, and it's easy to step away.
It is
really easy to step away.
And you look around the room and you're like, everybody's just kind of looking down. They're spaced out. They're doing whatever. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I like this idea. I'm gonna lean into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
That's it's a relatively new thing. It's not something I've done. Yeah, I haven't done it my whole life.
Did you read about it somewhere?
No, I observed it.
Okay.
My wife is great at it. She's somebody that she'll lean in immediately and willingly, but she has to kind of like pause to give other people a chance. But a lot of the time, she'll pause. No one steps in, and she's just right there.
Yeah.
And she's fantastic at it.
She's a great role model for that.
She is. I mean, she taught me a lot of things, but that's an example of something that like I observe her, in social situations. I met her at the church that we go to. She leans into everything there, within reason, and she's great at it.
Yeah.
And you see results come out of it. You're like, all right, well, I can do that.
Yeah. I can count probably on two hands the number of times people have affected my behavior, and they weren't my boss, they weren't a parent, they weren't an authority figure in my life, and that day actually impacted me. And I'll give you a couple examples. I was at work a couple weeks later, or maybe about a month later, and we're doing something that I'm not very comfortable doing, but I'm asking the entire team to do it. And we were going to have somebody do a walkthrough, and we hadn't decided who was going to share screen and actually go through this for the first time. And the guy leading the exercise said, "Who wants to share their screen and be the guinea pig here?" And I'm like, "Yep, I'll do it." And I screwed up a couple times, and I'm like, "But who cares? I'm leaning in, I'm learning, I'm setting a good example that leaning in is productive."
Yes.
You can't lean into everything. Time's a thing, right? You can be limited by time and other people's opinions and perspectives. But when it's right there and it's worthwhile,
right?
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. When the risk is, I mean, there's like a boundary to it. Like if me leaning in could cost me my job, I'm not going to lean in.
Yeah, sure. You're not stupid.
Yeah. Wasn't born yesterday, but at the same time, if leaning in actually provides some value, and the only reason people aren't leaning in is because they're scared.
Yep.
Well, why not?
Why not is right. I'll tell you another quick thing. There's a certain level of guests that I just haven't figured out how to effectively go after. Like they're famous in corners of the universe sort of thing, like a voice actor for a popular nighttime cartoon, or a guy who's won a couple Super Bowl championships. Well, I've landed both of them in part because you changed the way I think about those sorts of things. I'm like, what's the worst thing that happens? I learn from the experience and I move on to the next potential guest.
Right.
Yeah. You've helped me land some pretty cool guests.
I'll
give you names.
You're
afterwards.
welcome. And like if commission's a thing, we'll talk.
Yeah. So, what percentage do you want?
Well, I feel like 15's.
That seems reasonable.
Okay.
So here's how the math works today: 15% times 0.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So it's more of an investment opportunity.
Yeah, I mean,
we're working our way up.
It's a long-term investment.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes sense.
But today I can guarantee you I can pay you 15% of it. All right, so let's pivot back to where you grew up.
Where I grew up. I actually drove by your house on the way here. I kept going down 54, and you get to 301, right?
Yep.
And Hanover Courthouse is right there at the corner. And part of the reason for that is because I grew up in your school district.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to Hanover. I was the first full class. So I showed up as a freshman the year they opened. Made it all the way through. And Hanover's a good place to live. Or it was. I don't know what it's like now. I don't live there now.
It still is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was definitely, so I was born in Chesterfield, lived there. I guess for those, or you listener, it's south of Richmond. Grew up there till I was 9, and then we moved to Hanover, and I lived there for the next 9 years. And Chesterfield was great, loved it. Definitely a little, I would say scrappier. It's not your. It was like maybe like early 90s Chesterfield, kind of scrappy.
Yeah.
And then moved to Hanover, and I didn't have like this ultra diverse experience. Like Hanover's not exactly known for its diversity.
It's mostly rural. There's a small town of Ashland that's in the middle. Right. Politically, it's a pretty red place. There's some blue in Ashland kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I was going to school, it somehow hadn't soaked in yet. So like Hanover High was a great place to go and learn. I had some fantastic teachers, some incredible mentors. One just actually passed away a couple of weeks ago. His name was Daniel Bartels. He was the physics teacher there for, I think, 9 years before he went to collegiate, and he was the physics teacher there or STEM director. But I enjoyed it. I mean, it was a lot of, living close to Atlee Elmont. It was sort of like you get the best of kind of like the suburb life. But if I drive, 10 minutes down the road, there's a guy in front of me with a tractor. Kind of thing.
Either farming or there's woods or. Yeah.
Right. See, you were right at that fringe area between like, all right, if I want to make it to the city, I can get there in 25 minutes. If I want to make it out into the country, well, I turn around.
7 minutes.
Yeah.
Not even. Yeah. And
it was good. It was a good place to grow up. I mean, I don't know that my parents really thought a whole lot into it. It was sort of like this is halfway in between our job, like our respective jobs, and it makes sense to grow a family here. Why not? But yeah, that was my Hanover experience.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest. Yeah, I have a younger sister. She 5 years my younger, which was good. I got married recently, and part of her kind of like speech at the wedding was, she grew up in my shadow. So having come through Hanover, I leaned heavily into the extroverted part of my ambivert.
Okay.
At the time, and so all the teachers, they knew me, right? And so Abby comes through. She's like labeled as kind of Nick's sister.
Which no younger sibling wants to be labeled as.
No,
yeah.
No. She, in the speech, she kind of goes back and is like, I'm super proud of that, but at the same time, it was rough at the time, and I was not exactly the best kid growing up.
Is there a story there?
I mean, there's how much time you got. I was one of those kids that on paper I looked great. So I was an Eagle Scout.
Okay.
I got my Eagle Scout when I was 18.
An Eagle Scout who may have been mischievous at some point.
Yeah. So again, on paper, looked great. If I'd submitted apps to all the girls that I dated in high school, they would have signed off immediately. And so I looked good. I was in all the AP classes. I was smart. I played football and did all the sports. And
you were well rounded.
Yeah. I had it all going for me. But behind the scenes, I'm going to parties and sneaking out at night and doing all the things that parents would hope their kids aren't doing, but they also did when they were kids, so they know what's probably happening.
Most kids do that.
Yeah, I would hope.
Yeah.
Honestly.
You're exploring.
Yeah, you're figuring things out.
Yep.
And so yeah, I was definitely the kid, and all the teachers at Hanover, they knew, right? So my sister's coming through, they're like, "Oh, you're Nick's sister, huh? Yeah, you're gonna be a handful." And turns out she was actually like the perfect student.
Right.
Meanwhile, like I did maybe 4 pieces of homework in my 4 years there, so like I showed up, did well on the tests. I didn't do really a whole lot outside of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure it was tough for her.
But you guys are adults now, and I'm sure she gave a great speech at the wedding.
No, I think she still holds a grudge. I mean, the fact that she, like, yeah, your brother's getting married, and you're going to bring this up? Come
on. If she listens to this, will she laugh at that part?
Yeah, I hope so. I think so. Yeah, I think she would.
I have to ask, Eagle Scout, what was your final project?
I was ambitious at first, so that's kind of funny. I like reached out to the Massey Cancer Research Center. I was like, I'm a smart guy. Let's figure out how to do an Eagle project for you. What's like a good, can I like, set up a blood drive? Can we, like, how do we make this work? And they kind of came back and were like, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But why would we don't want to, we're not going to work with you.
You're not worth our time.
Yeah. Like if we need donors, we're going to go to collegiate. And we're not going to go to Hanover High School. And so I landed on, I think it was like a 2-parter. We did like a bridge on the North Bank, or like one of the buttermilk trails.
Okay.
And we did like picnic tables for a park or something. And it was one of those kind of like, I wouldn't say anticlimactic, but it was kind of like, so for those that don't know, like the ranks through the Boy Scouts, like you have like, I guess Webelow, Tenderfoot, first class, second class, first class, Star, Heart. Once you get Heart, the next one's Eagle. Oh, well, I got Heart when I was in 7th grade. Which is about the time that, like, I started getting interested in girls, and
sure.
like I'm playing football, and it just wasn't a priority for me. And so I get to 18, and it was kind of a panic situation. I didn't have the best GPA. I guess it was like 17, end of my junior year. I'm looking around. I'm like, I don't really have a plan, and this will become a theme. But I didn't have a plan, and I'm beginning to be concerned. Like, all my friends are getting early, thinking about college, and they're taking their SATs, and they're crushing it. And I'm looking around being like, well, what am I going to do?
Can I make money hanging out with women my age and drinking?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, I explored the opportunity. I did some market research, and I looked around, and, Joe Schmo didn't have a whole lot of teeth, and something telling me he's not making ends meet either. So
yeah.
I thought about it, and all right, well, I'm this close to Eagle. I might as well just get my Eagle. So I kind of, go through the motions, get all the badges and all that stuff, and it comes time for the Eagle project. I'm like, well, I got about 4 months before I turn 18.
Because you have to finish before you turn 18.
Yeah, you have to finish before you're 18. And I'm looking at it, and I'm just kind of like, well, all right, let's try the Massey thing. And after like the first,
you had 4 months when you went to Massey.
Yeah. I go to them and I'm like, hey, how do we make this work? And they're like, no, we don't make it work. And so then it was kind of like, all right, I realized I kind of, threw away, we'll call it 6 years. I need to get this. So I'm going to do, like, what's the minimum viable product for me making it to Eagle?
This is when you first learned about the concept of MVP.
This is, yeah.
Even though you didn't call it that, probably.
We didn't call it that. We called it what's the least amount Nick has to do to get Eagle. And the acronym was horrible. But we walked away. And
I don't know if you spelled that out.
No, I haven't, but it's like at least 4 words. We get to the point, I'm talking to my scout leaders, and they're like, just build some picnic tables, dude. Like, you know how to use a saw. Just get some guys, organize it, call it a project. It's public works. No one's going to build picnic tables for Pole Green Park. You might as well. And so that's kind of how it went. Like, it again, it was sort of anticlimactic. I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the Boy Scouts before, I sort of hit puberty, I guess.
Sure.
And then once I got there, it was sort of like, this is embarrassing. I don't want people to know I'm doing this. Like, it was still at the time
not cool.
No, it was not cool. It was not cool.
But it looks great on a resume.
It looks great on a resume. And so again, on paper, I look great. But behind the scenes, oof.
You lived an experience that...
I did.
You got to play a sport. Did you play other sports besides football?
So I played football. I ran track. Wrestled for a season or 2. I was relatively well-rounded.
So you were... did they have superlatives at Hanover?
They did.
Were you Mr. All-Around, or were you in serious consideration for...
I think I was in serious consideration. I ended up getting picked for most artistic.
Huh.
I know. It was... it kind of something I wore as a badge of honor in a way, because I wouldn't say I didn't fit the mold, but I didn't like to be put in a box, right? So people would look at you and say, "Oh, you play football, you're not good, like you're a jock," or "Oh, you're on the robotics team, you're a nerd,"
Right?
Or "Oh, you paint pretty pictures, you're an art kid."
Were you on the robotics team?
I was on the robotics team.
So wait a minute. You literally are checking all of the cliques. You're a member of every clique, and you're not a member of every clique. You relate to everyone.
Yes.
You have diverse interests, and you probably love the fact that you had those diverse interests.
Yes. My identity became, how can I be different? Like, what is the thing that sets me apart from all the rest of you schleps? And it's, you guys are all like following one path, and I'm gonna be the guy that you can't tell me what to do, kind of thing.
You basically see the lemmings headed in one direction. You're like, well, I don't have to do 180 from that, but I'm definitely going to take a different direction than that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that was growing up, and my family encouraged, like my mom and dad, they encouraged like the artistic growth. My dad was a state champ wrestler in Michigan growing up. So
and that's serious wrestling.
Yeah, it's serious. Like the wrestling we do here is, no offense to the guys that wrestle here.
I'm sure there's some fine wrestlers.
There really are. Mechanicsville High School.
That's the name now. Yeah.
At the time, they had a wicked wrestling program, and those kids, half of them were baling hay on the weekends.
Oh, it's country strong.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was a tougher environment but it's still nothing compared to Michigan. But my parents like kind of encouraged both, and they were sort of like, do it all, figure out what you like.
It's great.
It is.
It's great that your parents allowed you to explore like that.
Yes.
Because not a lot of parents are like that.
They aren't. And I actually grew up with some kids, like there was a guy I wrestled with and played football with, and like they were pretty hard on him. Like that's what he did. And I don't think it necessarily stunted how things went. Like he went to Hampton, Sydney, did fine. Great guy. But I remember him being kind of like just burnt out all the time. And I had all these avenues I could go down. I got to do kind of whatever I wanted. And as long as I was doing well, it was fine. It was kosher.
Yeah, it creates the beginnings of pathways for you, but at a point, you're like, I think I'm going to have to make a couple of decisions where I only play on maybe a couple of paths versus 5 or 6.
Which, it didn't really set in until after college, kind of, that was going to be a thing. But even going to college was hard, because like all right, so you're in IB art. You're playing football. Coach is telling you if you put together a highlight reel, we might get you into Hampton, Sydney. Art teacher is telling you, you get your portfolio together, you're going to go to MICA, which is like the Maryland Institute for Commercial Art, I think. You've got your physics teacher, the Bartels guy. He's like, you should be focusing on math and science. It's tough when you're a kid and you're like 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever, and you're trying to figure out like, well, what do I do? It became tough. Like I struggled with that a lot, because there were like, I don't regret having all the experiences I had, but maybe the only silver lining of being kind of like pushed into an area is like, you know what you're going to do. Like you have an identity in a thing, and like, if you're great at it, then, well, you can rest easy in that, and you can kind of just keep going down that path. If you're above average at a lot of things, well, which one do you pick, right? Because your counselor's telling you, well, pick the thing you're good at. Well, I'm better than most people at a lot of things. So which one? She's like, well, which one do you have fun with? Well, I have fun in all of them. That's why I'm doing them. Well, like, which one do you think is gonna, like, I don't know. They don't have answers after that. So for a lot of it was just sort of I could make money doing all these things. I could go to school for all these things. I'm being told that like I'm great at these things. Which one do I do? And so there's a balance. Like I grew up in the generation of parents that was like, you can do anything you want as long as you try, which is terrible advice. You should never tell your kid that. I will never tell my kid that.
Your phrasing was, what are you great at versus what do you enjoy doing? I think there's a critical difference there. And a lot of people, especially in social media and just screens in general, will put out the message, go do what you love and you'll end up being content, happy, and successful, however you define success. And that you're always hearing that from people that were part of the 100th of 1% who happened to make it in that field. And I'm like, that's awful advice. What are you good at? And then how can you find your own way based on that thing you're good at,
right,
or great at?
And it just becomes this like, it's a slippery slope, right? Like it's going to work for, like you said, 1% of people, where either you're only going to be great at one thing and you land in that thing, or you're going to be great at a lot of things because you explored a lot of avenues, or you're going to think you should be good at a lot of things and you're terrible at all of them. And so like the likelihood it works out is very narrow. And so I came out of that, and I'm sitting here thinking like, well, I'm good at all these things. Like which one? What do I do? You know. And I'd been playing this card of like, well, I'm going to be above average at everything. I might not be excellent at one thing, but I'm going to be above average at everything. And it was sort of like a jack of all trades. And it sort of worked. And then I get to college, and it sort of didn't work. So I get there. So I ended up.
Let's back up.
Yeah.
Where did you want to go? What schools did you apply to?
I applied to, I think 3 schools. I got into all 3. For being somebody that was terrified about not getting into college, did not put a ton of effort into getting into college.
Because the typical answer is 5 or 6.
Right.
Yeah.
And it should be. And you should like shoot for the stars on at least one of those. Mm-hmm. And I went with Virginia Tech, JMU, and VCU. And I get into all 3. I'm actually, since I'm on the robotics team and our team did well, I'm kind of told by VCU like, hey, or my physics teacher was like, you can probably get a full ride to VCU in their engineering department if that's what you want to do. And I go to JMU and take a test for physics, and they're like, yeah, you would clap out of the first year or 2 of physics. Like we get you into the advanced program, you'd be great. We'd love to have you. And then Tech's like, nah, we're not going to give you anything. Also, our physics department is what it is. Like, it's not great. Like I think they start out with like over 100 kids and they graduate like 12. Like it's a tough program. And so naturally I'm like, well, I'll pick Tech because it's the biggest of the 3 names. And
what did big mean to the 18-year-old version of you?
Big meant I go to interview for a job, and they're going to care about where I went to college. And 22-year-old Nick, 23-year-old Nick would probably look at that person and say, you're an idiot, right? Because it doesn't matter at all. No one even cares about your GPA.
Right.
And so I end up going to Tech, and I go for physics. And I'm there my first year, and at the end of the year, I think I had like a 2.1 GPA.
Because they intend to only have 12 guys your year graduate as a physics
major. I don't know if they intend it. I think the program is just not set up for success.
For the student.
For the student, no. It's one of those like, my freshman year, I'm in like what I would like for the physics kids is like physics 101 is the engineering physics for the engineers. And so they're like, these kids are like, the engineers are juniors, right? They've been taking calculus this whole time. They're sharp as a whip. Like, in order to get into the program, you have to be pretty smart. And the physics kids are just drowning.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's hard. And I remember coming out of my first year and just being like, this is not a major if you also want to party.
Yeah.
And I was minoring in party.
You're 18.
Yeah, I was 18.
You're away from home.
I'm like 3.5 hours from home. I'm looking at it like, well, I'm here to have fun. I'm gonna be fine. And at the end of my first year, I was like, I might not be fine. This is this is going downhill quick. And so I kind of look around and I'm like, all right, what's something I can do? How do I salvage this situation? Because my mom's like, hey, we're not going to pay for school anymore if you're going to be just,
Yeah, that GPA
poop in the
doesn't
bed.
cut it. It doesn't cut it, yeah.
And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, all right, well, what do I do? Either I stop partying and I focus on my education, or I find a different science that is easier. That's literally the only thought I put into it. Like, I'm going to college, right? Like, this is where you learn the things that you're supposed to use in your professional career. And I'm looking at it like, well, which one of these is the easiest? And
yeah, with no like next step.
I don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Like, again, like the recurring theme is Nick doesn't have a plan. I look at it.
Wait a minute. Does your new bride know that you aren't really a planner?
She has realized, and this is one of the areas she's helped me grow in.
She's a good planner.
She's fantastic,
yeah.
And that's rubbed off on me in a lot of ways. But at the time, she wasn't around, so. Nick's here without a plan, and he's like, all right, I already have all these prereqs for a science education. What do I do? So I look through like the science majors, and I'm like, oh, biology seems like it's pretty applicable. I could probably get a job, and it's gonna be easier than physics. I know nothing about biology,
other than what you took in 9th or 10th grade.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, I did well in biology in 9th grade. This will go great. So I signed up for the major, switch majors.
After your freshman year.
After my freshman year. Kept the physics minor.
Because
I was halfway through, yeah.
You're a masochist as well.
Yeah, I was like, well, I don't want to make it too easy, right? And my thought was, all right, this is what, 20, at the time would have been 2009 or 8. Like, all right, green energy's a thing. Yeah, biology, physics, it's got to fit in there somewhere. I'll figure it out. And so fast forward to the end of my junior year, and I'm talking to guys probably at a party. I think it was a party. And I'm like, yes, what are you guys doing this summer? You guys want to hang? And meanwhile, the summers before, I work construction. So I worked for 2 different carpentry companies in Richmond, and it was great. And I planned on doing that my junior year. And I'm talking to these guys. They're like, yeah, I got an internship at Northrop Grumman. I got an internship over at Boeing, and I got like NASA's hitting me up. Sliding in my DMs, and I'm over here like, oh, that's super cool, man. Oh, I love that.
I was gonna bartend, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking, what, like barback? Is that like a career? And I'm looking around, and these guys are all saying. So I call up my dad's dad. He was my dad's dad. My dad's from Michigan. His dad was head of new venture products at Dow Chemical.
Okay. And
growing up, he super smart guy. So I call him. I'm like, hey, you happen to know anybody doing internships? Do you? Like, it's Dow. What are they doing? He's like, well, I don't work there anymore. I retired. But I'm consulting for this sailboat company. Why don't you? I'll put in a good word for you, but you're gonna have to go through the interview. Like, you're gonna do your own thing. And so I talked to the guys, and I get the internship. So I I go up at it's called Goujon Brothers. They make sailboats and sailboat epoxy.
And how old are you at this point?
I had just turned 21.
Okay.
So he's like, yeah, talk to these guys. They're in Bay City, Michigan. Great company to work for. Like, yeah, check them out. And so I interview with them, and I'm like, yeah, why not? We never had an intern before, and that should have been my first clue, I think. This is okay. And so
we'll call it an internship.
Sure, we'll pay you. Like, yeah, why not? And so I meet up with these guys, and I end up in Bay City, and I'm living with my grandparents.
And you get along with your grandparents a ton, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, I would say more than maybe the average kid, but yes, yeah, we got along, and so I'm living in their house, and they've got like a 8-bedroom house with like the Gramps did well, and so they've got a great pad. And I'm like, well, why not? Free spot to live. All I got to do is mow the yard.
And they probably love the company.
They love the company. And they're like, yeah, and like I'm the only. My dad is one of 5 kids. He's the only son, and I'm my dad's only son. So they're of the generation that like, oh, you're the last Wisner, and I'm like, so go ahead and dote on me. Why not? And so I spend the summer with them, and it ended up being the best job I ever had. I would tell Boomer that tomorrow. Like it was the best. So the reason the job was the best was I would go in the morning, and I was hired as a chemical lab technician. So my job was to basically formulate epoxy.
Okay.
I knew nothing about epoxy.
You knew how to follow instructions, though.
Right. And I could read. I read up on it, and I figure, okay, you react these chemicals together, you get epoxy. Great. What happens if I throw this thing in? And so I had a few projects that like the head chemist at the time, his name was Chris Maples. I think he retired, but they like feed me these projects, but I was done by noon. So like I come in, I formulate epoxy for 4 hours. I come back and they're like, well, we don't have anything. What are the guys in the boat shop doing? And so I would help. Basically, I would help out building sailboats for like the last half of my day. And it took a couple of weeks, but a few weeks in, guys look at me and they're like, hey, you don't suck. Why don't you come to the beer garden with us? We'll get loaded. We'll go sailing. And then you can, that's what we'll do. And so for the last 2/3 of the internship, it was formulate epoxy, take lunch, go to the boat shop, work with the boat guys, and then get hammered, go sailing on Lake Huron every night. And it was a blast.
And when you're 21, you can do that.
Yeah, when you're 21, you can go to the beer garden every night. Right? Like I'm still running at the time. Like I'm in great shape.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it and I'm just kind of like, well, why not? So I end up dropping out. I drop out what would have been my senior fall semester, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, why go back to school? This is great. So I continue building sailboats.
Could you build one now?
I could.
Wow.
I could.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed, like, woodworking by itself is phenomenal, but when you build something that you ride in, it's that much better.
And it has to stay above the surface.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
It's that's the idea. And so I'm learning how to build boats. I'm learning more about chemistry. It was just a great experience. It's like an industrial job, a lot of blue collar guys, a lot of like
blue collar guys are great.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, yeah, I don't know, the stigma that surrounds blue collar guys is unfair.
Completely unfair.
It's incredibly, because they're a lot deeper than people give them credit for.
They're a lot smarter.
Yes.
They're a lot more practical.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, their smarts come in different ways. They might not be able to tell you how to formulate epoxy, but they're going to be able to tell you a lot more about life than you figured out as a 21-year-old.
They're really good at problem solving.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I get into, I drop out. I do this for a while, and then we get into winter.
What was your parents' reaction to you dropping out?
They weren't super stoked.
You're this all-around kid in high school, and
Right.
3 years later, you're
Just a wash up. Yeah, they were just sort of like, well, what's your plan? I'm like, I'll go back eventually. And I think they were disappointed, but there was also Nick's going to do what he's going to do, and B, he's not doing great, so maybe this break will help him out. And so I take the break. I, kind of just, I'm living in Michigan. I'm building boats. I'm having fun, but I made some friends, but I didn't meet anybody that was like life shattering. And at some point, I'm just kind of like, and when I got to the end of the summer, my grandfather was kind of like, all right, so you're going back to school, right? And I couldn't look him straight in the face and tell him no. So I was like, well, yeah, I will. And then I turned around and rented an apartment in Bay City and worked out of that company for the next 4 or 5 months. And so I'm just not, I'm not in a good spot. And by the time winter rolls in, A, the boats are shut down. B, Michigan's wicked cold.
It's a brutal place.
It's a brutal place. Like lake effect snow is a real thing.
Yeah.
That's it. It piles up. And so after a few weeks of that, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'll go home. I'll just re-enroll in school. Let's do it. So I enroll in the spring semester, go back to tech, show up in January ready to rock. And I did pretty well after that. Like the break actually helped to recenter.
Breaks can be great.
They are. And like people, like you need to take time for yourself.
The lemmings are all doing it in 4 years. Right?
Right. Yeah.
I was a lemming back then.
Well, and like, it's not like if you have the fortitude to make it through 4 years and you know what you're doing, you're going after something that you want to go after, go for it.
Most of the lemmings don't have a clue.
They have no idea. And they're doing it because like mom and dad said, this is a great idea.
Yep.
And you should do this. You're not going to get a job if you don't. I'm going to support you for the rest of my life. So go get a job. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily from the parents' perspective, but there is like I walked out of college with like 62 grand in debt, and Biden's telling me now I gotta pay that back, and I'm pretty sure I voted the reason or the way I did for a reason, and I'm still paying, and I'm looking at it and I'm just kind of like, well, if I had known then what I know now, maybe I don't make the same decisions. Maybe I do. I don't know. But being told kind of like, hey, you need to get a job. Like in order to get a job, you're going to have to go to college, which I guess now is probably true. It just made it really tough. Like what like I don't have any options. Like what do I do if I don't go to college? And I think that was part of the uncertainty piece. It's like why I flip majors is I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. I don't know why I'm here. I'm here because somebody told me I should be here. And so it was just very like, I wouldn't say, it's just very confusing. I had no idea what I was doing. But after the break, like I'm working with these guys, and I'm working with guys that have college degrees, have masters, PhDs. I'm also working with guys that can't spell college, and they're both fantastic.
You love both sides. Yeah.
I love both sides, and I'm able to walk out of it and be like, well, I'm going to be fine. If all I do is this for the rest of my life, I join these blue collar guys, I'm going to be fine. If I go back to school and work my tail off, I'll make it to one of these master's, PhD guys. They're doing fine. It's not the end of the world. Like all this pressure like, yes, parents put pressure on you. Yes, like culture, society puts a little bit of pressure on you. But there's an element of it too that like I think I kind of just blew it out of proportion. And I got in my head that like, well, if I don't do this right, I'm screwed. And I don't think that's true.
It's not true.
It's not. But when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, whatever, like you don't know better, right? Like, growing up in Hanover, I was told I was great at everything. I get to college, I'm told I'm not great at everything. And so like my world's already rocked, but I'm also trying to figure out like girls and, money management.
How am I going to be independent?
Yeah. How do I pay rent and for this kick? Like what how do we do all of these? It's a lot. Like growing up is, I thought I was prepared going into college, and again on paper I look great, but like when you get there, it's a whole different story.
Yeah, I've said this a lot on this podcast, and anybody that knows me pretty well, they've probably heard me say this 50 times.
Sure.
But the young male adult brain, it's not all the way there.
No.
When you're 18 to 22, it's still forming. If you graduate at age 22, you're still 3 years away from your brain being fully formed.
Yeah.
Think about that. And we're putting 18-year-olds, male and female, into that position. The girls are a little more prepared because they're a little more mature, or maybe a lot more mature.
Sure.
Boys trying to graduate at that level with those sorts of pressures, because the next step after you graduate or leave, however you leave, is to, like you had, it's real life.
Yeah.
Because your parents certainly didn't raise you to just hang out in your 20s and live with them.
Right. But at the same time, we have this, it's not like a pandemic, but like this, all these kids coming back, and part of it's like the economy and like markets and whatever, but like kids coming out of college and moving back in with mom and dad, and they're just hanging out. And
because the world scares them.
Right. And like, it's not that mom and dad necessarily prepared them wrong, but they come out of college, and like the difficulties right now surrounding like how to be an adult are tough.
Yeah, and you were under a pandemic where your social skills are stunted a lot.
Yes.
Whether you were in high school at the time, you were doing the high school thing, then going to college, or you were in college the entire time. It's really, really rough, and you can entertain yourself without interacting with another human being for days on end if you want to.
Absolutely.
Not healthy at all.
No. And like, even as like, I love technology, I work in it every day. If I were somebody, like if it were me graduating right now or a few years ago, I don't know what happens. It can be a cancer. Like they engineer social media apps to be like slot machines. Like the whole idea is to like get a dopamine hit and
just keep coming back for more. Yeah.
Right. And when kids are already struggling to like find themselves, to have that at their disposal, like they call gambling addiction an addiction for a reason.
Yeah.
It's a dark spiral. I kind of forgot how we got here. How we got here?
We're starting with struggling at that age.
Yeah, struggling. Well, and so I ended up graduating. One of the first, and we'll kind of come back to this, but one of the nonprofit I worked with after college was called Code VA, and they prepped kids. They focused mostly on like inner city kids and like kids without.
It's where kids from Hanover County go when they want to be coders.
Right.
Yeah.
There's Code RVA, which is the high school.
I'm thinking of the high school.
You're thinking of the high school.
Yeah.
Code VA, they were here first, and they were the guy, like they're a nonprofit that part of their mission is to teach teachers how to teach code. Interestingly enough, they also were the ones lobbying to make that a thing. So they kind of like sort of dogfooded themselves, but they did a great job of being like, listen, you don't know what you want to do when you get out of high school. Don't jump right into college. Like, if you're interested in coding, great. Take a year, figure it out. get a job, doing something, figure it out.
There are a million applications for kids who can code, right?
Right. Exactly. Like, figure out what you want to do, man. Like, don't, like, I got very lucky in a lot of ways. Like, I'm not saying hard work wasn't part of it. Definitely was. And, like, perseverance, sure. And, like, there's an aptitude for it. But at the end of the, like, I got super lucky. So I go back to tech. I end up graduating a year later. So I was fall 2011. And I ended up having, the only reason I really had to say that extra semester was not because I dropped out for a semester, but really because I had a lab that was only offered in the fall.
Yeah, it's weird how schools do that.
It's kind of dumb.
I'm going through that with my oldest right now. Yeah.
It's wildly frustrating. Even if you plan everything correctly and your counselor, like, whatever. So I take the lab, and I'm like, well, I'm already here. Might as well take some more courses. I take like an intellectual property, like science, technology, and law, I think was the class. And I got really into it. And I thought, all right, well, maybe I'll be a patent clerk. Because it occurred to me, like, that last semester, I don't, again, the recurring theme, Nick doesn't have a plan. I don't have a plan. I'm getting a degree in something that, like, I don't want to do research. I don't want to work for big pharma. And, well, those are my two options, at least at the time. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm just kind of like, well, what do I do? What do I do? And so I'm in this science, technology, and law program and for this class, and the professor she's phenomenal. I'm introduced to, like, the law side of things. I'm very intrigued, which is kind of a thing. Like, I'll bite if something intrigues me, kind of thing. And I get to the end of it, and I graduate, and we grab coffee one day, and she's like, "Well, if you're going to be in Blacksburg, you want to be my TA for the next semester, you can. We're going to ramp up the program. There's going to be more, like, IP stuff. I can get you plugged in with Virginia Tech's intellectual property, like their patent guys, which I didn't realize this, but Tech has, like, the third largest portfolio of patents among public universities.
That's really cool.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And so when she told me that, I was like, well, sure. Albert Einstein was a patent clerk. He's pretty smart.
Yeah.
He did fine. I'll do what he did. Like, he and I, we're on the same level, right? So
you were destined to do all kinds of greatness.
Yeah. I want to make some breakthrough physics discoveries. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, I'll do this patent stuff, and so I go to the College of Science, and they're like, yeah, we'll get you plugged in, work with these guys. And so I worked for them for it was probably about 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. So it turns out a big part of the reason Tech's patent portfolio is what it is because it's almost entirely grass. Yeah.
They started that as an agricultural school.
They did, and they have this turf program, and it's a great program. Like, all of the...
It sounds like it's world class.
It is, yeah. All of the grass you see on football fields in the NFL, most soccer stadiums worldwide, it comes from grass that they, like, patented.
From Blacksburg, Virginia.
And so they... Every day in and day out, I am reading patents about grass and determining whether or not it's an executable patent. So these professors are submitting these patents, and not them, they're TAs. And I mean, like, you have...
Are you the only person in the adjudication process?
I'm the only one reviewing all of them.
You're a step in the process towards the patent.
Yeah. So, like, the actual lawyers at Tech are the ones executing the patents, but I'm telling them whether or not it's going to win.
Yeah.
Basically. And so I'm reading through these things, and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I don't care enough about this.
I don't know how anybody could care that much about graphs.
Right. Yeah, like you get to a certain point and you're just kind of like, well, I don't care. And I'm 22, approaching 23 at the time. And so I'm just sort of at the point where like I got to find something else. This isn't going to work. Like Albert Einstein can do it.
Do we know how long Einstein did it?
A couple of years. He was at the U.S. Patent Office.
Okay.
He was up in D.C. So I mean, it was a few years. I think it was right after he moved from Germany to the States. I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
But yeah, he did it for a while. But at the same time, he was also he was reviewing patents that were probably novel, because in the 40s and 30s,
everything's
doing
novel.
Everything's novel.
Yeah.
Right. The patent office has only been around for, I don't know, less than 100 years at that point.
Oh yeah.
And everything, industrial age, whatever. He's not reviewing patents on grass
Every time.
every day. Like I got 600 patents in. I'm like I'm done. I'm done.
Oh man. All right. So what was the next move then?
Next move was, all right, well, I'm going to stick around in Blacksburg for the next year. This is probably March 2012. February or March 2012. And I'm like, well, I already signed a lease. I'm living here. Blacksburg, at least at the time, I'm sure it is today, like notoriously hard for breaking a lease. So I'm stuck with it. And at the time, I was dating somebody that was, she still had a year left. She was going to graduate in the end of that year. So I was like, stick it out, So I go back to the College of Science and I'm like, hey, do you guys have anything else? My rent's $275. How does Nick make enough money working for you where he can still afford rent and like live? Because I can't do this patent stuff anymore. And like the person I interviewed with, she's like, well, you don't have, and meanwhile, the entire time I'm doing this patent stuff, I did end up TAing for the professor that I had talked to. So I'm doing that for like $10 an hour. It's like ballpark, $100 a week, maybe $150.
You're not killing it, but it covers rent.
Right. And I'm doing this patent stuff on the side. And so I go back to College of Science. Like, well, you're already TAing, but like you're not a student. You're not a graduate student. I was like, I'll wash dishes in labs. I'll do anything. I just need a little extra beer money. Like, help me out. And I'm like, it's something nice to put on a resume. Give me something. And they're just kind of like, well, we don't have a ton, but we need somebody to overhaul our websites. Like, do you know how to build websites? And
building websites back then is very different than doing the templated, just click on a few buttons and now you have a website. You had to really code.
You had to at least be dangerous enough to like you might have had a content management system. So Tech had a CMS, and they had like, a way of building a web page, but like you had to know if you wanted to do anything outside of kind of like their sort of rubric or template for or a website, which is very generic. Like you had to know something. And so like the people that work at the College of Science, like one of the things I learned working with them is the majority of the people that work for Virginia Tech, and I imagine most universities, like especially like staff people, they come from the area.
Yeah.
And so these are like people that grew up in Blacksburg, and they're like, we don't know anything about websites, dude. Like we don't know anything.
I know the thing they told me to start doing
I know
8 years ago, and I'm still doing it. Yeah.
And I can like open a browser and I can go to a web page, and I know Google. But it was just sort of this like, So anyway, they asked me, they're like, yeah, can you build websites? And I'm like, well, yeah, I can build websites. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, I had a MySpace, like I put music on my MySpace. I know how to do like the I didn't even know it was called CSS, but like I know how to change the styles. Like I can make my name bold. And so I lie basically in this interview, and in the back, like also in the back of my head is well, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna get paid for 2 weeks and I'll find something else if that's what it comes to. But I kind of I lean in and I'm like, well, why not? Let's make this. That's like we can at least see where it goes. I'm gonna learn something, and that's something that excites me. I wasn't learning anything doing patents. I might as well learn some,
not a thing.
Not a thing. I might even I could have regressed. And so I walk in the interview. It's maybe like Thursday or Friday, and they're like, "Great, can you start Monday?" And I was like, yeah, let's do it. Monday sounds great. I'll see you guys then. Like, all right, we'll give you a laptop. You show up. We'll make it work. And so I lead the interview, and I'm like, this is great. Got a job. Also, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I drive to Christiansburg, go to Barnes and Noble, and I pick up, JavaScript for Dummies and like
so you don't go to the internet to learn. You go to a book.
Right, because in college, at least at the time, it was, you wanted to learn something about something, you had the textbook to go with it.
Grab the book.
You grab the book. And instead of going to like Virginia Tech bookstore, which probably had what I was looking for, I go to Barnes and Noble in Christiansburg. I buy HTML and CSS as a book and JavaScript for Dummies, and I read them cover to cover over the weekend. And by the end of Sunday, I'm like, I'm in big trouble. But I show up on Monday. I start building websites, and it took me a while to figure out. But what occurred to me was essentially, and this is maybe like I don't know if it's naive arrogance that goes with this, but it was kind of like, all right, all this stuff is essentially basic English and basic math. And I know calculus, and I've been speaking English for a while. We can figure this out. It cannot be that hard.
It's doable. Yeah.
It's doable. Now, fast forward a few years, turns out it's a lot harder than that. But at the time, it was just basic, like copy, like you can figure this out.
They didn't have high expectations, I imagine, at the time.
They didn't. And anything you did successfully was lauded.
It was like a magic trick.
Yeah. It was like, hey, look what I did. I put a button on a page. And they're like, oh, it only took you 3 weeks. And it's like,
we couldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing the College of Science site, and the first page takes me, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Second page takes me a couple days. The rest of the website took me, a week, right? Like I figured it out and started crushing.
And you were good at it.
I was good at it. And I get to the end of it, and I finished doing their websites, and I'm like, all right, what's next? And they're like, we already thought of it. The registrar's office needs their websites overhauled as well. And so there's like student services and like you could, they're going to be a career. Like the College of Science was hourly. They just upped my hourly wage, but the registrar, so I do the registrar like May, and they're like, yeah, we'll pay you $32,000 a year to come to like work as our IT guy, like fix all the printers and workstations, but also build the websites. $32,000, which in 2012 not a ton of money, but in Blacksburg,
You could stretch those dollars.
you could stretch those. Yeah. And so I'm like, I get a 403B, I'm contributing. And, like it was great. Ended up learning like Linux, working for them. Like they had me set up their like print server for doing transcripts. So like right now, you like even today, but at the time you would call into Virginia Tech and be like, hey, I need a transcript. They're like, it's $50. And we'd print one for you. Well, they were shipping like 30 of those bucks out to get printed by somebody else.
Yeah.
And they're like, can we print these in-house? I'm like, well, yeah, we can do that. So I learned Linux. I figure out how to do the print server stuff. And then I'm kind of coasting, but I get to the end of my sort of like girl I'm dating. She graduates and she gets a job at the Fed up in DC. And I'm sort of like, well, what do I do now? Like I made it a year. We figured things out. I moved like twice in that time, maybe 3 times. But like, now what's the plan?
Do you understand how useful what you've learned over the last year was going to be?
I had an idea, but I hadn't really looked into like job markets. I was just sort of like
fear the unknown kind of thing.
Fear of the unknown, but also like I'm still trying to learn what I'm in. I'm trying to make. I'm not thinking forward because I'm in part because I'm bad at planning, but also because I'm in the midst of it and I'm trying to figure it out. And so I get to the, end of the year. This would have been, I guess, early 2013, January 2013. And what happens at like universities at the end of the year, most staff take off, right? It's Christmas, New Year's. Kids are already gone. There's no point in being there anyway. And so everybody kind of encouraged me, like, you get 2 weeks off a year, take at least 10 days at the end of the year. Like, save those pups up. And so I did, and I took all 10 at the end of the year. So I got, a little bit before Christmas, the full week after, and then New Year's. And I'm driving back after New Year's, and I get a call while I'm driving. And I think at the time I had like a Jetta. And I get a call, and it's, from a recruiter. And she's like, you have time to talk? And I'm like, I got 3.5 hours. Like, what are you doing? And so we talk for probably an hour about, a job opportunity. And I'm like, yeah, I could be interested. Like, tell me about it. And by the time I get home, like I talked to this lady for a long time, and she's like, I think you'd be a good fit. I'm going to have one of my guys call you next week. We'll kind of go from there. And so he calls me, I talk to him, and then it ends up being a staffing firm for Capital One in Richmond. And so it works out where like I end up being a contract employee for Capital One because this contracting firm hires people that have no idea what they're doing to do a job that they're probably unqualified for. And they bring me in, they, get me plugged in, and I'm just like, all right, well, I guess we'll do this again. We'll figure it out. And that was like going back to kind of like how I got lucky. This is an example of how I got lucky, where I have a degree in biology. I got lucky that, I was able to get a web design and development job with the College of Science because I begged them for one.
You begged them for a job and not that particular job, and they just say, well, yeah, sure, you could help us with our website.
And I like not effectively, but like literally lie in the interview and say I can. And they were like, great, you start Monday. And like, it just kind of fell into place. A year later, not even 9 months later, I'm getting a call from a recruiter to, be a contractor at Capital One, which like at the time seemed like a really big deal. And it kind of was. Like I sign on with them, and a couple months later I meet Mark Shapiro, who was he's now my manager, but
you sit next to him.
I sit next to him.
Yeah.
Which like there's a whole story there, but he, it worked out where the perseverance and like the wherewithal and like the hard work piece definitely was like it played into it. It definitely made a difference, but it wasn't like the linchpin. It just kind of sort of fell into place in some ways. And that's,
I don't know if our listeners can hear my dogs barking right now, but it's driving me a little nuts.
I don't blame you.
Sorry, keep going.
I can hear him barking. It's I'm just it kind of just fell into place where
now we have one of my kids yelling at the dogs. Yeah,
that's fair.
This is good times.
Yeah,
this is not the first time it's happened.
I'm fortunate that things worked out the way they did, because it didn't have to happen that way.
It's a bit of happenstance. It's some you got
some things fell into place.
Yeah, and they do,
and they do. And I guess I'm still kind of learning that, where it's like, all right, luck is really just where opportunity meets like preparedness, I guess.
Yeah, you put yourself out there.
Right.
You lean in places where it makes sense for you to lean in, and
right.
Luck eventually finds you.
Yeah.
Or you find it.
You'll either stumble upon it or you will fall into it. But if you showed up prepared, regardless of whether you're prepared or not, but if you make every effort to show prepared to every opportunity, eventually it's going to go your way.
Yeah, you just have to keep getting up.
Yeah,
and making the effort. All right, let's. What do you do with your spare time today when you're not with, like, your wife's like, hey, go spend half a day doing whatever you want to do, and you're new and you're married, so I don't know that you're you have half days.
I don't get half days. I get hours.
But imagine you had a couple hours.
I'm counting this in minutes. My wife is incredible. Like, she's incredible, but also she's incredibly active. She is somebody that if she has something every night of the week, she's getting filled up. That's like, she gets filled up by people.
Yeah.
Like loving on them, spending time with them. Like, that's just who she is at her core. And I am very much not that way. It's not that I dislike people. I love people. I love relationships with people. But
you don't have to be around them all the time.
I don't have to be around them all the time. And I need my, like, space. So, like, an ideal for me, we'll call it half day, is doing, like, a project by myself. Whether it's woodworking, whether it's, fixing the tub upstairs, whether it's, whatever it is, like patching the roof. I love using my hands, and I love especially getting outdoors if I can, but really just using my hands and being alone. Those are two things that, I wouldn't say I covet, but I've learned to respect their value in my life.
It's where you get energy. At least one of the places you get it.
Yeah. That's how I get recharged. But another thing that fills me up is, in spite of what I just said, it's kind of, I really enjoy helping people. There's a selfish part to when you help someone. Anybody that doesn't admit that probably isn't doing it very often.
Or they're not being truthful, or they're not thinking about it enough.
Right.
Yeah.
I fully believe that you and I and your daughter upstairs, and we were designed with a purpose. You have a purpose behind you. And part of that design is to lean in to that purpose. Whatever that purpose is. And it doesn't mean that the thing that you're leaning into is going to recharge you, but it still makes it your purpose. And so what recharges me is the alone time, the doing, using my hands, working, accomplishing a thing. But the thing that I feel like it's my purpose is really geared towards helping others out. I'm good at all these things. I'm good at woodworking. I'm good at problem solving. All things that most people my age aren't typically good at. I find myself being better at than most. And I have the energy still to show up for people and be like, oh, you need to build a fence. Let's get to it. Or you want to do a patio. Let's get after it. Those kinds of things also recharge me. So even though it's not me by myself, that's something that I get a lot out of.
You're still getting everything you get out of it when you're doing it by yourself. It's just you're with other people. That's the only difference, it sounds like. And you're doing something for somebody else.
And you're getting the gratification out of doing something for someone else. And I think that's the recharge piece that's different, is when I'm doing it by myself, I get that alone time and I love it and I need it. But there's an element of helping somebody else do a thing that I know how to do that brings me a gratification piece. And that's part of the reason I do it. I would love to be you know what? I get nothing out of it.
I'm the most selfless person on earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm not that person. I get something out of it.
I think everybody does.
I hope they do.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, why are you doing it?
Right.
Kind of. And then I would say the last thing that kind of recharges me is kind of learning. I really enjoy just finding something new. My job is best when I am intrigued by the thing that I'm doing, or there's a newness to it that I have to figure out. Whether that's people management, whether it's a different language and software, or a different way of doing things, whatever. That's kind of my wheelhouse. So if I get all three of those things in a week, it's not a Jimmy V day, but it's still a pretty good day. You may not have laughed, cried, or been deep in thought.
Yes.
Yeah. And that I might not do all three of those things, but I'm still gonna have a great week. But the Jimmy V thing, it does stick with me. That's.
Oh, it's brilliant.
It is.
It's very simple. It's very straightforward, and he's absolutely right.
He is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time I watch, I guess we're coming up. Well, mid-December is when that'll hit the ESPYs again.
Yeah.
I go to Hill City, which is right over there off Staples Mill, near Broad.
Yep.
And so Capital One had kind of burned me out. It had really, we were going through some migration efforts, and anyway, things got tough. And at the time I was contracted, and I came out of the contract work and stepped right into the next thing, and it was just awful. 80-hour weeks, 80 to 100, and just
brutal.
on call all the time.
Brutal.
It was rough. And so I get to the end of that. It was probably May. I don't remember the year. 9 years ago, I guess. 8 years ago. And I get to the end of it, and I'm done. And the friends I had at the time were pretty rough, and so I linked up with some guys that I knew from high school in Hanover, and guys that I had gone to tech with, and Michael Lieber was one of the guys, and he was like, why don't you come to church? So I go to this church with him, Hill City. It's maybe got 300 people. At the time it was super tiny, and it's over at the U-turn building right there off Stables Mill, and we're doing our thing, and that was the next 7 years of my life. Was like, that was where I was beginning to find like purpose, and like my faith started but also grew. So growing up, I didn't go to church. I didn't have like a faith background. It wasn't like I came from like a Catholic upbringing and like de-churched and going to this. It was sort of like all brand new, and so I'm going there. I build a community with people, or a community of people, and one of the guys, his name is Kevin McGeorge. He also a collegiate guy. I ended up moving in with him a couple years ago, probably about 4 years ago, and he like kind of changed my life, and like really, like, he had been going to church there for a while, but he knew the Wagglers that started the church for a long time, and he just has a fantastic story. I'd love for you to get him on here.
Okay.
Like, he's a great guy.
I mean, not many people say so-and-so changed my life.
Yeah, he did. He absolutely did. And for the better. And so, I get to know this guy. I lived with him for like, almost 3.5 years. I ended up buying a house. And the fall of 2021, I ended up going to the Wagglers for like we call them like Shabbat dinners. Basically, like Jewish Shabbat was you take a night off, you take a day off. The idea is like there's a day of rest, like in Genesis, there's creation story, there's a day of rest. Shabbat aligns with that.
Yep.
And it looks different for everybody. Like, they're pastors at a church. Sunday is not really a day of rest, but Friday night into Saturday night could be. And so that's kind of like when we would do it, is we would, show up, we'd make dinner and all that. And Kelley was at one. And so I meet her there. And I had actually met her in 2019. We briefly. We both ended up going to Israel together with like a group of 30 people. And there's like the tattoo on my arm is from the oldest tattoo shop in the world. It's in Jerusalem.
That's a really cool story.
Yeah. It's called Razouk, Razouk, I think. A tattoo, and it's they're on their 27th generation. It's from the.
That's wild.
Yeah. And
nothing lasts 27 generations.
Right.
Man.
Right. And they like from the Crusades, like 1600s. Right. So these guys have been tattooing, really Christians this entire time. They're Palestinian. They're allowed to operate their business within the walls of Jerusalem. Like their tattoo shop is built into like one of the walls of David. It's gnarly. And what's like super crazy is we show up at the tattoo shop. There are Harleys parked out front. You walk in. the guys have hair down to here, like shoulder length, and like ripped like leather jackets.
There's nobody like them on earth.
Yeah, it was like, am I getting a tattoo in Daytona, or am I getting like the translation between the two was just phenomenal. Like they're playing Led Zeppelin when you walk in. It was
Not something you expect when you're in Jerusalem.
Right. Like I had heard zero American music when I got there until I walked into a tattoo shop, and it was and I'm asking them to like tattoo Hebrew on my arm. And they were all into it. Like they were super cool, like great, like could not hype them up enough. But Kelley was there on the trip, and she got her first tattoo at the same time. And
in the same place?
Same place.
Okay.
I found this place.
But y'all weren't dating at the time.
We weren't dating at the time. It was 2019. A buddy of mine that goes to Hill City. His name's Matt. Matt, sleeves on both arms, like he's a ton of tattoos, and I kind of like mentioned to him, like it'd be kind of fun to get a tattoo together while we're here. I found this place, turns out it's pretty cool, what do you think? And he just let everybody else know, and so we ended up with like a half of the people that went on this trip. It was like 32 people that went on the trip, 31. 16 people show up at this tattoo shop. Like we book them out for the night.
Yeah.
2 nights in a row, I think. And so they tattoo us, and Kelley I think she got like an olive branch on her elbow or something. But that was kind of our like first interaction. But I was seeing somebody at the time, and so I wasn't, you're on a, Christian trip, you're not gonna like hit on somebody while you're dating somebody else.
Right.
It's kind of a faux pas. And I ended up dating this person for another 2 years.
So you're in 2021 now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I get to the point where I'm just kind of like, I'm not gonna marry you. I can't do this. And it was incredibly hard for her, but it was something I should have done a long time ago, before that. But
if you'd been thoughtful about her and selfish, you would have done it a long time ago.
yes,
Yeah.
But I thought the right thing to do was kind of like figure it out. And break up, fast forward a few months, and then I go to this dinner, I see Kelley. We kind of, I'm like, oh, she's pretty cute. We'll see what happens. And I kind of knew she was cute. I remembered her from like the trip to Israel, and
You're
all
not
that.
blind back
Right.
in 2019.
Yeah, exactly. And fast forward a few more weeks, maybe a month. I hosted dinner at my house, and it was sort of this like pasta dinner night where at the time I was like super into making pasta. Really enjoyed making it, and
You mean from scratch?
yeah, from scratch.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And people were like interested in learning more about it. So I was like, oh, I'll just host a night. Well, end up having like 20 people over to like make pasta. It's just mayhem. Absolute mayhem.
And fun.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah.
It's incredibly fun. But you have like people stretching pasta dough across the kitchen, like literally like 10 feet. They're like, it was just absolute mayhem. But Kelley's there, and she's, helping me plate out all the dinners. We're doing it together, and she's just incredibly agreeable. She's having fun. She's got this incredible smile, and I'm captivated. I'm like, dumping stuff on the floor kind of thing. And after that, I text our friend John, who's the lead pastor at Hill City, and I'm like, hey, I think I have a thing for Kelley. What are your thoughts? And I knew they were close. Like Kelley's on staff at the church.
Okay.
She at the time was working with their like discipleship group, and I was, I'm texting him this, and he sends me back a novel, and it basically starts out like, so Kelley's like a sister to me, so just kind of a heads up.
Yeah.
And
don't be an idiot.
Yeah, don't be an idiot. And he was like, yeah, these are all the things you need to make sure you have lined up to be able to date Kelley. And so I get this back. It's like right before Thanksgiving, and I'm like, all right, game time. And so a buddy of mine was living with me. His name is David. David had played baseball at UVA. He was super athletic dude. One of my best friends, and he, I tell him about this. He's like, all right, we'll get into the gym day after, Thanksgiving weekend. Let's hit the ground running. And so we're in the gym, basically quit drinking. Like
you were all in.
I'm all in. I'm like, you know what? It's not going to hurt me to do all these things anyway. Even if she doesn't want to, give me the time of day, I might as well try. And so I do all this work and like make sure I'm like centered on some things, and like one of the things was like, you got to be rock solid in your faith. You need to know that like inside and out. I'm like, all right, we'll figure it out. Do that. And then McGeorge has his...
This is the guy that changed your life.
Yeah, this is the guy that changed my life. Kev is... He knows guys that own the Clifton Inn up in Charlottesville. And so his birthday comes around. He's like, you know what, let's do it at the Clifton. I'll get us the farmhouse. We'll all stay there. Well, I hadn't talked to him. I lived with the guy for 3.5 years, but I hadn't talked to him about Kelley yet. The only person I talked to was John. And so, he invites all these people to his birthday. It's like 10 people. Well, one of them is Kelley. And I'm like, wow, you talk to John. You son of a gun. Ends up being perfect because, we're at the Clifton. We go for a hike one day. She and I connect. We do... like dinner the last night and like the wine cellar at the Clifton.
Just the two of you?
Everybody, but like I kind of like position myself. I like elbowed somebody out of the way and like make sure I'm right next to her. And we're just, I'm cracking joke after joke. I mean, I turned it on to the
end. You're on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're laughing. We're having a great time. But it was also kind of like a feel out, like is this person gonna get my humor?
Right.
Are they gonna what are they gonna come back with?
Or just get you, period.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because there's a need to be seen in a relationship, and like humor can cover up a lot of things, but it can also reveal a lot of things. And like when you're having that back and forth, like you get an idea of like, is this person gonna see me? Are they going to know who I am? And so we end up having a great time. At the end of it, I wanted to ask her on a date before we left, but I had some foresight. I was friends with her roommate. I, text her. I'm like, hey, Natalie, how do I approach this? I have a thing for your roommate. I want to ask her out. She's like, well, she's skittish. So you're gonna have to.
Hold on, you're starting to plan now.
I'm planning.
There's real planning going on.
There's real planning. So like we get back on Saturday, and I'm.
Hold on. What did her roommate mean by skittish?
She's well, like if you come on too strong, you're gonna scare her off.
Yeah,
kind of.
That's normal.
Yeah, and which like I wanted to, guns blazing, like we had a great time. Let's do this.
Let's do this every night.
Yeah. And so I talked to Natalie, and Natalie's like, well, you should text her before you call her and tell her you're going to call her, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's new for me. When I was
right.
When I was courting my wife, that wasn't a thing.
My plan was just call her up and be like, hey, what do you think? You want to go on a date? And so I text her, and she's like, yeah, I'll talk to you. And call her up, and she's like, well, yeah, like, I'd love to go on a date. What are your thoughts? I'm like, wow, why don't we get coffee, roastology? What do you think about like 8 o'clock on Friday? She's like, how about 8:30? I'm like, sure. Sounds great. Well, or no, I said 7:30, and she's like, well, how about 8? Kind of early for a Friday. I get there at 7:30. They're closed until 8. Mm-hmm. Rosology doesn't open until 8. So anyway, we get there and we're there for, I don't know, 3 hours. I think she might have said 4 things about herself. I basically just talked at her for the better part of 3 hours. And I like she'll be the first one to say this, but when she walked out, she was like, this person doesn't know anything about me. Like I talked the whole time. I gave her my whole life story. I mean, it was this times 2.
Yeah.
And she still gave me a second date. And Wags, that's what I call John Wagler. Wags texts me and he's like, hey, just a heads up. You should probably ask more questions. You didn't hear this from me. And so he gave me a heads up. So the next time, ask more questions. And then from there, it just kind of took off. 9 months later, we were engaged.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was definitely a whirlwind. I think a lot of people would look at that and be like, oh, you met a girl and, 9 months later, yeah, and, asked her to marry you. But it was one of those kind of like, I met her in 2019. And if I'm being completely honest, I knew, I was interested then. I knew after our first date, and I was like real sure after our second.
Yeah.
And it took her some time to convince. She wasn't on the same page, but it was great. And so we get engaged, and she had gone on a trip, middle of us dating. This is maybe like 4 months into us dating. She goes to Greece with, some of the, like, the 2 lead pastors at Hill City, John and Lacey. They both went on a trip to Greece, and they had like a group of like maybe, I think 13, something like that. Kelley was one of them. They had an extra room, and I could have gone. But Kelley was kind of like, I don't know you that well.
Yeah.
And it was like a protected kind of thing. And so she didn't invite me. And, but while she was there, she's talking to Lacey and Lacey's kind of feeding her ideas. And she's like, well, how funny would it be if you guys got married in like France? What if you got married in Paris? And so we get engaged,
But this was at 4 months.
This is like in 4 months.
Yeah.
And it was trending that direction, but it was kind of like, well, A, it's too soon to know, and B, like, we can't afford France. And so fast forward, right? Like we get engaged in October. It'll be a year that we got engaged this Saturday.
Okay.
Fast forward to like December when we're actually like starting to plan this thing. In my head, I'm like, all right, we're doing a fall, like we'd be getting married now, kind of thing.
Right.
And we had kind of like talked about it and thrown around ideas, and it was just sort of like, all right, well, it makes sense to try to do it in the summer. And so her friend throws out the idea, like, why don't you guys try to get married in France? We toss it around, and I'm like, we can't afford that. Like, I'm 34 at the time, or 33 at the time. I'm we don't have the cash to pay for a wedding in France. Well, then I look into it, and to rent a chateau in like 2 hours south of Paris was like $14,000 for 3 days. It's like rent, a chateau. Now, granted, middle of the week, but if you're having people from the outside,
who cares?
of the US, who gives?
Who cares? Yeah.
No, nobody cares. So we ended up booking it and then just figuring the rest out.
So you got married in France.
We got married in France. It was.
Are either of you French?
No, she knows French. I know nothing of French. But it was kind of like this. All right, well, why not? And
You got married in a chateau.
we got married in a chateau.
Scenery's probably gorgeous.
The photos are incredible. We've only gotten half back because our photographer, part of it was she went with us. We were there really for 2 weeks, but like the first weekend was everybody show up. We'll meet you guys in Paris. We'll have a blast. Everybody goes down to the chateau. We'll do the wedding, all that jazz. We get back on Thursday. And so like the wedding photographer was there from Sunday till Thursday.
Wow.
And she was like 5,000 pictures to sort through.
Yeah.
And so it's taking a little longer, I think, than she expected, than we expected to kind of.
But you'll cherish most of those, if not all of those pictures.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We had a blast. I mean, it ended up being just, like the plan. Like, do I recommend planning a international wedding in 6 months? No, I don't. Was it a blast? Absolutely.
Looking back, it was worth it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, cool. Nick, we're at an hour 42. Your bride's probably wondering where you are right now. I don't know what you told her, what the expectation was about how long you're going to be here.
I told her I didn't know how long this was going to take. So,
well, hey man, it's great learning your story. I adore lots of it. I especially love the tattoo story. That's amazing.
yeah,
The way you thought about dating Kelley and then getting to a wedding in France is a really cool story. And then you being all around good at a lot of things, and then like kind of being lost for a good while, and then
yeah.
some luck happens and it works out.
No, yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it definitely worked out. And I couldn't be happier, but it is one of those things where, yeah, luck does play a part.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, Nick. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.